Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we talk about the adventure of life and all things good. Hey, I'm Rafe, and I'm here not solo this week. Zach is still doing the things back in the home office, but I am joined this week by a very special co-host and guest. Harry is in the studio with me. Harry, how are you doing today?
Hey, Rafe. I'm doing absolutely fantastic. It feels really good to be back in the studio. Even though I'm a couple thousand miles away from you, but it's a nice spring day here on the 4th of July weekend.
Yeah, Harry has been busy doing some things that we'll discuss at a later date, but it's Harry, it's great to have you back, and it's great to be able to see you on the screen here and have some discussions. Remember, all of you listeners out there, we want to thank you for listening. Without you, we're just a bunch of guys having a regular conversation. We are a global top 10% podcast, and if you need anything, you can reach us at bufnagle@bufnagle.com. We are on Twitter, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher. We are all over the place, and you have, I'll bet there's a billboard in Bosnia somewhere that says, listen to the Buffer. We are everywhere. If you are new to the podcast, hey, welcome. We're glad you are here. Give us 4 episodes or so. See if we don't give you a reason to come back. We're talking about all sorts of interesting things, and we'll surely find something that resonates with you. And remember, please subscribe, all right? Hit the little subscribe button, the little smiley star button, whatever that is, and then give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or some of those other things, because that's super helpful, because it helps us, officially, but it also, it gets me pudding and gets everybody else associated with the show. It gets some free brownies, and that is a wonderful thing.
Oh, man, I'm not ever going to turn down free brownies. I guess one of these days, I hope that, the 5-star review ping comes in for you, and I'm nearby, and that way Mom can take an extra pudding out of the cupboard and give it to me as well.
Yeah, that's right. So, it's she is the keeper of all things pudding and brownies, and if she's not, if she doesn't hear the ping, sorry, man, you're out of luck. So, we were talking last week, Harry and I were, about interesting things we've read and movies we've seen, and we were discussing a book that came out in the last decade that I don't want to say it's really changed your life, because that's not really what those kinds of books do, but it sits in your consciousness, I guess. And
Sure.
Tell me the story about this book and eventual movie.
Yeah, the book is The Martian by Andy Weir. Some of you out there may know the book due to the movie starring Matt Damon and all of his escapades about the U.S. government trying to get him safely back home. But The Martian was released in 2013, and before that was published by Andy Weir on I believe a monthly basis. He published either chapters or sections at a time on his blog and gave it to everyone for free.
Yeah, so he would post these, like, he's writing the story, right? And he says, hey, I'm writing a story. And he puts them every month. He'd put a chapter out there, and people would comment on that, right? And they would say, wouldn't they critique it too? They would provide feedback like, I don't really understand where this character's going, or why did you speak about that? Or I don't understand how the rocket works, or, right?
I'm not really sure about that, but I know that it was part of like a science group of individuals. So enough nerds out there enjoyed the literary content that was relatively accurate.
And that is part of the real fun of the book and the movie, is it's not just, hey, this guy goes to Mars and then he came back. I mean, there's a lot of discussions about, force and rockets and the kinds of things that we spend a lot of time on this podcast talking.
Physics, mathematics, chemistry, botany.
Botany's in there. Okay. So the story is about a guy, Mark Watney, who's on Mars, right? And so
that's right.
Give us the plot summary and the spoiler, okay?
Sure. The plot summary is Mark Watney, astronaut and botanist of the group, is part of a 6-person crew that is on Mars. They're the third crew there. They're the Ares 3 crew to land on Mars. And of course, they're doing a month-long assessment of rocks and can certain plants grow inside of their little hub. All the things that astronauts do that are rather mundane to the rest of us, right? You go through all this astronaut training and you end up just collecting rocks.
Well, but we've talked about this with Bob a lot of the times. I went back and looked at the episode we had about Mars, and the spoiler, the lead-in thing I had was, it's really cold. It rains carbon dioxide. There's no other air. Let's go there. I mean, so like it's just rocks, right? And there's dust, and there's really not much there on Mars, and on the rest of the solar system, there's not a lot of stuff. What else are you going to do on Mars than dig up rocks?
That's what you're going to dig up rocks, and you get caught up in dust storms, which is kind of where the story begins, right? So the crew is 6 days into their mission, and a massive dust storm is coming in that threatens to tip over their Martian ascent vehicle that gets them back into orbit to push them back to Earth.
So they're living in this Martian commune, all right, on the planet for 6 days, and they have a rocket. This is like
it's out in the garage, right?
That's right, and it's just sitting out back, and it's tied down with cables, and that's their escape thing in case they have to escape. They have to in case the Martians roll up in pickup trucks like from Mad Max with the guns on the back. They just run to the rocket, jump in, press go. Right? That's the plan?
That's exactly what happens.
Okay, so
there's the dust storm, right? And NASA basically tells them, you got to get out. So the 6 of them are going through, and they're going from the hab, right? So their little building where they live, up to the rocket to return them to Martian orbit. And as they do, Mark Watney gets slammed in the chest by an antenna. Right?
So the thing blows off a building, right?
Blows off a building, gets uprooted, and smacks him into next week. Almost literally, right? And
yeah.
Wakes up the next morning. But no one else knows that he woke up the next morning. They can't find him. The dust storm's too thick. The rocket is at risk of tipping. So it's either the rocket tips and all 6 of them die, or the commander takes herself and her other 4 astronauts back to Earth. And that's is no one recognizes that Watney is still alive because all of his life support systems got shut down because the antenna went right through those.
Well, but he survived, right? I mean, so there was enough life support to keep his breathing going, right? And he wakes up the next morning just like, I'm in the spacesuit. I'm lying here in a drifted pile of Martian sand, yep. and all my friends are gone, and they're feeling terrible because they left him behind. That's a big human quandary, right? Like in any kind of situation where people are at risk, do you never leave a man behind? Or do you go and rescue the ones that you got? That's the question.
Yeah, and I'm sure we can go into utilitarian philosophy of, do I save the 5 people and not save the one, or is the one really worth it? There's multiple different philosophies and religions that can all address the same topic in different ways.
Yeah, but there's no train coming that you have to flip a switch, right? To either take right. Okay. All right. So
it's just a trolley problem.
Yeah. So it's the Martian. We now have the Martian trolley problem with the guy who can't communicate lying on the tracks asleep. So he wakes up the next morning, or sometime later, after he got bonked on the head and knocked out and buried in Martian sand. The other 5 crew members are gone, and he can't communicate with anybody because he has no long range radio. And they are they back? They're not orbiting Mars. They are on their way back to Earth, right?
Back to Earth, right. And that's exactly it. So he has no communication. He manages to get himself back into their hab. I forget what hab stands for, right?
Probably
habitat.
It's like habitat. Yeah, I'm sure it's a habitat. Yeah, there we go. We figured something out today.
So he manages to get back into the hab and lives for the next couple of days.
And he's just kind of going through, it's like I'm doing this right now because my wife is out of town, all right, taking care of some other business, and I'm here by myself. It's just me and the dog, and I'm kind of like Mark Watney here in central Indiana. But it's just me doing what I do on a daily basis. And now I do have communication with you, but if you have no communication, all you're doing is keeping yourself alive. It's kind of like the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks, but not on a remote island, on a remote planet.
Yeah, so not only can you not get any resources or go outside or attempt to build a fire, right? Those things just don't exist. Actually, all of those things hurt you. You can't go outside because you'll die. You build a
Right.
fire, you die. So
You take off your suit, you die. So it's like it's a he's living on the okay. So like I've talked to a number of people about this. We talk about where life exists in the solar system and in the seeable universe. We can't see everything, right? But from what we can see about what's going on out there in the universe, life appears to exist, at least from what we can see right now, only on this planet.
Right.
Only on this planet. All right. And not only that, not only is it only on this planet, it's not on the whole planet. It's on this little ridge of like from maybe a couple thousand feet below ground. Like if you get some of those fish that don't have eyes and those crayfish that are transparent, and right, so you get some of that stuff on the down, or like at the deep sea vents, all the way up to maybe a couple thousand feet in the air. There's this shell of life on the outside of this big rock, and it's just on the outside of this rock, and we live in this. It's very tenuous. I always think of it this way: I'm on the edge. I'm stuck to the side of the planet, and down by my feet is the rock of the planet. But above my head is essentially space. I mean, if gravity stopped working, I would just fly up. I mean, there's nothing holding me down other than the gravity machine, right? Yeah. So I'm right on the edge of this thing. And somebody told me one time that you were always somewhere in the neighborhood of, a minute or two from dying, but every time you take a breath, you reset the clock. Okay, and that's an interesting way to think about it. Without the air, without the water, without the stuff you need to survive, you're on that knife's edge of falling off one way or the other. And Watney is on a knifier edge of a knife's edge there on 100%. Mars. It's a very scary thing to think about, but he's there and he decides to just work the problem.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of this book is work the problem, what's in front of you, and how do you get to the next step. So he determines that his next step is water and food. Right? So he's got to survive. So his first thought is, well, I'm just going to survive until the next mission gets here. Okay, well, that's reasonable, right? You have all of the food that was supposed to be there for you, plus the food for 5 other people.
That's good.
Which is great. You've also got water for yourself and for 5 other people. So you've immediately extended your life probability 5-fold.
Right.
Which is good. Except you're going to start running into issues of your equipment's not designed to sustain you that long. Your food isn't really going to last that long because he realizes he only got half the food, even with the extension, in order to get to the next mission.
Well, why was he missing the food?
Because the 6 times extra food from the other astronauts doesn't reach to the extension date of the next mission.
Oh, right. Okay. So, and we've talked about this too. The getting to Mars. There's certain times you just can't get there. I mean, because it's not like we're going side by side, like Earth and Mars are going side by side around the sun. There are times when we are on opposite sides of the sun, and there's no sense even trying to race around to try to catch the other planet, because by the time you get to where the planet is now, the planet's going to be gone. It's going to be where you are now. So you just have to wait. You have to wait till it comes back, and then.
Yeah, you thought hitting a receiver down the 40-yard line was hard.
Yeah, you got to hit the planet coming across the middle, and there's certain times when the planet's just not coming across the middle, and he's got to wait a long time, right? It's hundreds of days, right?
It's hundreds of days. But he does figure out food and water and electricity. So he figures out a couple of things. He figures out he can separate water through hydrolysis from his urine, and he can create water with fire from the hydrogen from the fuel that is still remaining in another one of the rockets that was sitting there.
So he's going to essentially make bufnagle Martian electric water is what he's making.
That's right. He makes electric water, and then he sells it to the Martians.
Well, he builds he fills out all the paperwork to get the business going, but there's not a lot of customers. So
it's a small LLC.
All right, so he's making water through chemistry, through better living through chemistry.
Through chemistry, and then he also figures out, he's a botanist, right? So part of his job was figuring out things can grow. He mixes his fecal matter with Martian soil, creates soil, and then ends up growing potatoes.
So and he gets he takes the potatoes that they have in storage, right? And he cuts them into pieces.
That were for Thanksgiving, right? Because they were going to be over there for Thanksgiving. So NASA said, you should deserve a nice meal and have all these good things.
So he's got potatoes, and everybody knows you take potatoes and you put them in the ground. If there's certain little pieces of the potato that will grow those. If you leave the potatoes in the back cupboard too long, they will grow those little things out of them. Those, I'm sure the botanists in our audience will tell us exactly what they're called, but they'll start growing and they will throw out roots and shoots, and he gets potatoes up there in the Martian soil, and he grows them in the little hab hut that he now has to turn from just a human hab hut into a potato hab hut.
That's right.
Right. So it makes it very humid and collects the whatever up. Yeah, he makes it a place to grow plants. He makes a greenhouse.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, he stumbles across multiple issues, right? So the first issue was when he was creating water in the first place, he made a really big explosion. So he's got to redo his math and figure out where all of the extra oxygen is coming from, making sure he doesn't kill himself.
Yep.
A couple 100 days later, the airlock from overuse rips and tears.
Yeah, that's a bad thing.
Right? And, during all of these times, he's also trying to figure out how to communicate.
Right, because nobody knows he's still alive.
Right, so he's alone. Well, they do figure out he's alive because they've got satellites on top, right? And they realize, all the solar panels have been dusted off. The rover keeps moving around. So they figure out that Watney is alive. So NASA knows that Watney's alive. Watney probably has an idea that NASA knows, but can't communicate with them. But he figures out there's an old rover that NASA hasn't communicated with in about a decade called Pathfinder.
Okay.
So he determines, I'm just going to go pick it up. It's probably got a working antenna on it and some comms devices.
I'll just reboot it. So he drives out, he reboots the system after bringing it back and establishes communication. But he does some really it's very, very slow communication, right? I mean, he takes a picture. Doesn't he he does a really clever thing. He
does hexadecimal
ASCII.
He does ASCII at 15-degree intervals along a circle, so he can take a picture of every single. I'm probably describing this really poorly for all the listeners, right?
Yeah, but the goal of the bad description, Harry, is to get people to go watch the movie and read the book. Okay, so that's
that's right. I'm really helping everyone out here.
That's right. It's a benefit.
No, so he takes a picture at certain intervals, according to ASCII, and they figure out the code, and then they can communicate with each other by having the rover camera point to all of these symbols.
And it takes so communication between Earth and Mars is not instantaneous. Okay?
That's right.
So it takes how long
It's 8 minutes.
It's 8 minutes. So I want to say the word hi to you. So I have to type H. I mean I have to tell my computers to make Watney's computers do the letter H. So I push H and I hit send, and the rover camera stops on H, and Watney writes it down, and then he waits 8 minutes, and the
well, not quite, right?
Well, and then
command for H and the
you're right.
I at the same time.
So it'll go to H, and then it'll go to I, and then he has to go thumbs up. You and I can just go thumbs up, but he has to say hi back, right? And so these communication periods take a really long time, but he eventually establishes contact, and then meanwhile his buddies are going back to Earth, right? And
they still don't know that he's alive. Yeah,
so they are suffering survival guilt and all sorts of issues with travel, and it's not an instantaneous flight back to Earth. It's what it's
months.
Yeah, it's multiple months, if not years. And so they're on their way back, and finally NASA tells them he's still alive.
That's right, and they are, I would guess, stunned, right, in the first place. The commander obviously feels some certain amount of guilt because now instead of just I abandoned a dead crewmate, it's I abandoned a living crewmate
Right.
to just perish on the Martian surface. So eventually, what happens is, because I'm sure we can go through all of the different issues, NASA decides, well, Watney's not going to have enough food, so let's send him some food because that's faster than getting a team there and a return rocket and all these other things. So they go through the building process to send him a booster with food, and the booster explodes on ascent.
Yeah, that's nice.
So now in the meanwhile, while all of this is happening, Watney has lost all of his potatoes because the airlock burst in and wiped out all of the bacterial life that he had living inside of his little hat.
Well, yeah, because it froze it like in a heartbeat, right? Because it's really cold there.
Right. But the potatoes are still edible. They're just freeze-dried.
Right.
So now the booster is destroyed. He doesn't have any incoming food. He realizes now that he doesn't have enough food to make it to the next mission. So he's got to figure out, well, great, like now how am I going to get back? And with communication with NASA, they eventually figure out, like you've got to get to the other site within a certain period of time and hopefully come back.
Yeah, so we talked about this with Bob a lot, that the idea was you don't just go there, right? Before you go there, you send and you stockpile things at a site. And so they, in the book, they had done this, right? They had set up the Ares 4 mission, right? And it had been stocked, and there was stuff there at the Ares 4 site, but it was a long ways away from where he is. It's like 2,000 miles away, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it's something like. So it took him like 60 something days, 60 or 70 days. I think it's around 2,000 kilometers.
Yeah, right. And it's when you watch the movie, you can say, "Oh my gosh, he's got to go a long distance," and it shows him doing all these things like drive. He rigs up the rover so he can drive, but that thing was designed to go like maybe an hour or two, so he has to drive and then recharge the batteries for a long time, and then drive and recharge the batteries for a long time, right?
And don't forget about bringing all of his life support systems, right? Because that's designed like at maximum for like maybe a day of life support.
Right, so he has to drive a little bit and then just sit and wait while the very weak solar power from the sun charges up the batteries and keeps him alive and allows him to drive. And in the movie, it's kind of, I'm sure the idea was in the movie, how do we make this appear really long? Because it's, like you said, 60 or 70 days. And if you're in a 2-hour movie, anything over 2 hours is considered, too much time for me to invest in this endeavor, right? But it's if you think 2,000 miles, that's driving from what, Chicago to LA, right? I mean, yeah, or even farther than that. And he's got
30 miles a day.
At 30 miles a day, it's a little bit faster than walking. And it's not like we've talked about that before. There's not rest stops. There's no gas and sip along the way. There's not even the world's largest ball of string that you can stop and look at. So he's just driving, or a quick, any of these, nothing is there, and he's doing this on his own. It's a remarkable thought about, I guess I'll call it human resilience, or the idea that you're gonna. What are you gonna do? Give up? What are you gonna give up?
What else do you have to do, man?
What else? What else are you going to do? And so it's an interesting thing to think about. Is what would you do? That's kind of the question. What would you do in that situation? And I think I'll say the steely-eyed rocket men always have that question. They asked Buzz Aldrin this question a long, long time ago. They said, if you were in an orbiting spacecraft and the engine failed, and you only had an hour's left of life support left, what would you do? they asked him that, and they kind of expected him to say, well, I think I would think about all my friends, and I would try to communicate with NASA and tell my wife I loved her. So they asked him, what would you do? And he said, well, I'd work on the engine.
It's,
I'd work the problem.
The last time I was on the podcast here, I think I was talking about airplanes and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that's the same mindset. Your engine goes out. Well, you're not going to call somebody and say, sure, you call air traffic control. By the way, my engine's out. And their response is, okay, well.
Look for a safe place to land.
Same mindset. Work the problem. Figure out
Did you have that thing when you were training that that your pilot instructor sneakily turned off the fuel pump? Did he do that to you?
No, that never happened to me.
Oh, okay. Well, that's the thing that they did at our school is he would there's a switch on the floor for switching the tanks, right? Mm-hmm. And he would reach down there and turn that thing to off as he was like, "Oh, I dropped my pen," and he'd reach down there and turn it off at the same time. And within a minute, your engine just dies, and you're up there. And now you've moved from being a single engine plane to being a very heavy glider.
That's right.
And you have to look for a place to land, and you have to work the system, which is, there's a procedure for that. Here's what you do: find a place to land, and tell people you're going down, and then start working to try to figure out how to restart the engine. So he gets all right. So he's going cross country.
That's right.
Road trip.
At the same time, NASA has told his crew that he's alive. So they literally cannot do anything because their rocket is already heading back to Earth. But at the same time, there's another physicist, an astrodynamics guy, sitting at Earth going, this booster just fell apart. But what we can do is we can still send the booster to the rocket, to the returning spacecraft. They can pick it up en route and then fly all the way back.
So they send a new booster with the food and supplies, right?
After the first one was destroyed, the Chinese figure out that they have an extra booster.
They just have one lying around. Yeah, we got one.
They were doing some missions and stuff. And
yeah.
There's a interesting conversation between the head physicist of the Chinese Space Administration and the actual director. And the director says, the physicist comes in and says, we've got an extra booster that can help out Watney. And the director goes, well, if we just didn't tell anyone about it, would anyone ever know?
Really?
Yeah. And she goes, no. He goes, well, so he's faced with this dilemma of he has in his country's administration.
The Chinese guy has it.
The Chinese guy has the power and the necessities and the resources to save the stranded astronaut on Mars.
The American astronaut on Mars.
The American astronaut on Mars. And he can either go ahead and do it, or if he doesn't do anything, no one will ever know.
No one will know that he was just a real schmuck.
Yep.
Yeah. So I guess I'll cut to the chase here. He helps out, right?
He does. He helps out.
Good for him.
They send up additional supplies. So NASA and the Chinese work together. They send up the supplies to the returning crew spacecraft.
And
who at the same time defied orders from NASA in order to boost their engine to get a slingshot rotation around the Earth to return to Mars.
To go back to Mars. So they've been traveling from Mars back to Earth. When they get to Earth, they're like, we're not coming down. We're just zipping around. We're going to slingshot around you. We're going to grab the extra supplies, and we're going to go, they go, supplies, and they go back to Mars, right?
That's right.
All right, and that everybody's dumbfounded, but they're all kind of impressed, and people are like, should we be mad at them or not? And there's some, you can see there are people high up in the administration that are suffering from political overthought, right? They are worrying about what the political outcomes are going to be, and they don't realize that what everybody wants them to do is to go get the guy on Mars, right? That's right. And so they go back to Mars.
They go back to Mars. Watney makes it to the Ares 4 Martian ascent vehicle and starts stripping it down so that he can get up high enough into Martian orbit to reach the spacecraft coming around with the rest of his crew.
because that spacecraft wasn't designed to orbit Mars,
No, it's
right?
not.
So they have to be higher up, and he's going to have to get higher up too.
As a result, yeah. So he's got to go faster.
So he takes like all the parts off the. I mean, like he's like throwing out seats and
nose cone goes, the control panel goes, the chairs go, and he's literally just sitting in it, and it's remote piloted by his buddy who's orbiting around him.
Okay, and he takes off the nose cone, and I remember seeing that in the movie, thinking, well, how's he going to? But like the Martian atmosphere is really thin, right? And it's only windy for a while until you get above the atmosphere, right? So he puts like a tarp over the top, right?
That's correct.
All right, so he puts a tarp over the top of the rocket so he doesn't get blown away.
That's
and
right.
then he's been wearing a spacesuit like nonstop for like a year. I remember thinking he's got to smell terrible. It doesn't that happen when he gets on. Okay, spoiler.
Like, I smell bad I smell bad after 2 days,
And you're not even wearing a spacesuit. But so he's doing that, and he loses a whole bunch of weight, and he doesn't get physically sick from like germs because there's no germs up there. But he's exhausted, and his body's wearing out, and they launch him up, and what happens?
And he passes out, right? Because you're pulling an absurd number of G's. He passes out, and then he is in, oh man, what's the term? Suborbital orbit? He's suborbital. Right? So he's not going to make a complete orbit, but he's going to go into space and then come back down.
He will fall back down.
He will fall
unless somebody grabs him.
That's right. So he is at the mercy of his crewmates. They figure out Watney's not going fast enough.
He's not going to make it up to. He's jumping. He's going to fall down before he hits our ship.
He'll be short. Either that, or they can catch up to him. Right, slow down their orbit to decrease to decrease their altitude. But then he's going too fast, so he would go speeding by them. So they eventually figure out a way to slow down their spacecraft to somewhat manage the same relative velocity, so they can come out of the spacecraft and bring it back on board.
So does he go like completely free at some point? He jettisons from the spacecraft, or
in the movie he jettisons himself free by poking
a
hole in his glove, right? Because he says, "I can be Iron Man," and propels himself towards the spacecraft and gets picked up.
Because he's losing a little propulsion from the air escaping his suit, right?
That's right.
Okay. So and it's not like you have a couple tries to match these things up. I mean, you get one shot, right, to get these orbits to align.
One group's going back to Earth, one group's going back down to Mars forever.
All right, so spoiler alert, they rescue him and he makes it back to Earth.
That's right. They all do.
All right, and so, and then he comes back, and then he kind of sits like, here I'm back at Earth, and he's like, in a conference room having conversations with NASA, and he goes to talk to the engineers at whatever university, and he sits and watches the ducks in the pond or whatever it is. And so what's the lesson? What's the seek the good, be the good, spread the good from The Martian? And like for you, it was this issue that, you started reading this book on your way back to college, and you read it for like nonstop until you finished.
It's the only thing I did for like a day and a half or 2 days, right? I picked up the book at the Nashville airport in Terminal B, I think, or whatever it was. And I picked it up. I started reading it. I read it the entire plane flight. I read it the entire bus ride back to school. I read it that entire evening. And I think I read it the entire next day.
Yeah.
And I had people coming up to me. He's like, hey, can you do something? I'd be like, oh, yeah, sure. Later.
I'm reading.
And it was one of the first times in a while, because I used to read a lot in high school, that I read a book straight through nonstop.
So you loved the book. The movie was a good representation of the book.
It was, yep.
All right. But there's some bigger lessons there about, and we talked like, how do you make the decision to leave a guy behind or to rescue the guys you have there? Those philosophical questions. And there's some bigger questions there about like, to what lengths would you go through to rescue. Like there was one guy stuck on Mars, one person stuck on Mars, and they moved, quite literally moved heaven and earth to get that guy back. And that's a statement of the worth of the individual, and that's the good. That's the real good, is how these groups will come together to do that. And I think that's a mindset that probably didn't exist back in the ancient world, to do that sort of thing, but it exists now. And I think that's one of the great advances of our age, is the recognition that everybody has. I go back to Imago Dei. Everybody is of infinite worth because they are image and likeness of God. And that's why we do those things that we do.
I would agree. I think everyone has intrinsic value. If the astronaut doesn't have intrinsic value, you would leave him there. And there is no question, because the only thing that's important is the mission.
Right. And
who's up there doesn't matter. You could send a robot, you can send a human. They are interchangeable if you don't care about the person.
Right. So there's something more to the person than just the ability to do the work, right? I mean, because you said, they left the rockets behind, they left the rovers behind, they left all the supplies, they left the potatoes, they left all of that stuff. And the reason we do that is the recognition that the person is of invaluable worth.
That's right. And that goes across any profession. Right, so if it's an astronaut trapped in space, if it's some soldier on a battlefield, if it's somebody that's in a car accident, right? There's all of these things. They're very different, but there is still the prospect of, saving the human life. And I think we could argue about whether or not how you save them, or is it worth things. But I would say that the value of the person is more valuable, it's better, it's more important than the value monetarily assigned to it.
Well, and there's other things too, because if you don't, as soon as you start monetarily assigning and say, well, there's this line that we're not going to cross here, it's like, well, that's just too expensive. It's just too expensive. It's one thing if you can't, right? There's some things that you just can't. Right, so they moved heaven and earth to do what they could to get Mark Watney. Great, yes, it is fiction. I got it, right? Because they could, right? But at some point, you're like, we can't. There's certain things you can't do. You can't get there. There's not a way to make it happen. But the idea that you would move heaven and earth to rescue somebody speaks to this. That is the. I want to say pinnacle. I don't want to put it too high up, but that is the nature of that's what we're looking for. Okay, that's the goal. That's the optimum. That's the thing we're trying to achieve, is that we want to live in a society where we worth everyone that way. Everybody, whether you're a NASA scientist or whether you're a guy living under a bridge, there's a dignity of humanity that has to be respected, and we will work as a team, and we will pull out all the stops to help you. Now, I'm not saying our society always does that. I'm saying we fall short a lot. Sure. But that's got to be the goal. If you can't say that the goal is bad because we don't achieve it. The goal is still good, right? And we have to focus ourselves toward that good.
We orient ourselves towards what is good. And what is good, capital G, in order to reach that near pinnacle of what you're talking about.
Yeah. So The Martian by Andy Weir, starring Matt Damon as Mark Watney. One of Harry's favorite books and movies, and I enjoyed the movie tremendously. I haven't read the book, but that's it's on the list with the whole other pile there that's on the coffee table. So Harry recommends it highly.
I do. Absolutely. It's probably top 3 books, if not number 1, just because of the character of Mark Watney himself is zany and fun. He's smart and intelligent, and you're rooting for him the entire time.
Right. And it's a wonderful story that that focuses on a lot of the things this podcast focuses on. So with that, Harry, we're going to wrap it up, and I'm going to encourage all of our listeners to go seek the good, be the good, and spread the good, and enjoy the adventure of life.